Okay, I'll start the broadcast.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Watson with the Telluride Foundation. Welcome to our Southwest Colorado call. Just a couple points here before we get started. A little bit of housekeeping. We have moved our call to 45 minutes to help our facilitators transition in between our other 3 regional calls. So we will be ending this call at 12:45 today. As always, I will be sending a follow-up email with all of the content discussed today, as well as any other information that you may need. This call is being recorded, and that will be available in that email sent from me this afternoon, as well as up on our Facebook page if you'd like to go back and access this information. So today we are excited to have Brad Feld on the call. He is the chair of the Innovation Response Team and member of the Governor's Economic Recovery and Growth Council. And he's just going to be with us for the first 10 minutes to talk about the plans for reopening Colorado. We will be able to take a few questions during that time for Brad, as he'll only be on again for 10 minutes. We also have Mark Betts with ASAP Payroll on the line, and he will be talking to us about prepping for the next round of funding with the PPP that was just signed this morning, PUA advice, and any loan forgiveness advice as well. If you have missed it, the 4th stimulus bill was just signed into law by President Trump this morning. It is a $484 billion bill, and that brings the total stimulus for coronavirus to $2.8 trillion. In this bill, briefly what I've read so far is that $310 billion has been allocated for PPP, and $60 billion has been reserved for small businesses who do not have a banking relationship. So a really critical point there. My piece of advice right now is if you are going to apply for PPP as a small business, many banks have changed their application. They have changed the rules for applying, and I just recommend that you go back to your bank and have that conversation. Some banks may be accepting non-clients, some may only be working with current clients of the bank. So I think it's just good to recircle with your bank and have that conversation and start calling banks if you do not have a relationship with them to essentially start that application. So with that being said, I am going to hand the floor over to Brad Feld to give us an update on reopening Colorado. Brad, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And to talk at a high level, I think, through a handful of things just to sort of frame some of the dynamics that are going on across the state of Colorado in sort of the linkage between all the different issues that are going on, as well as dynamics between the public and private sector. I want to start by just framing this with the intersection of 3 crises that we're dealing with simultaneously. And I think it's really important to recognize that these are three interrelated crises that are going to be playing out over a long period of time and that don't have an obvious, simple solution. The first is the health crisis, which is obvious, I think, to many of us in terms of how it's evolved so far. I would say that while it's evolved so far, it's still evolving, and it's in an early phase of us as a state, a country, and frankly, a civilization in terms of actually dealing with and addressing long term. The second crisis is an economic crisis, and I presume everybody on this call is focused on that in addition. And that economic crisis wouldn't exist in the absence of the health crisis. Our overall economy was quite strong. There were lots of challenges in lots of different parts of the world, and different parts of the country, and different parts of the state, different dynamics between types of business, lots of inequity across the business landscape. But the general backdrop was a pretty healthy one that's been very dramatically impacted and shifted by the emergence of the healthcare crisis. The third crisis is a mental health crisis. And this is one that's a result of the first two crises. As human beings, we're not used to being in our homes for 30 days, 24 hours a day with our family and not being able to be out and about in our normal routines. There's enormous anxiety and stress that emerges at a personal financial level and a business financial level, independent of the stresses from all of the different health dynamics that are going on. Many people, and I expect many people on this call, are putting huge amounts of energy both into their communities, their businesses, themselves, their families, their friends, possibly other volunteer efforts, whether it's for the state of Colorado or for other organizations, to try to help people through these crises. And that takes a toll over a long period of time. So if we start with a frame of reference that we're actually dealing with three crises, I think that's an important point. On the back of that, we're dealing with an incredibly complex system. The number of things that are changing in real time is immense. And frankly, in terms of my own experience, overwhelming. I've been involved in many, many, many complex things, many that were successful, many that were not successful, lots that changed over time. But the number of new inputs we're dealing with literally on a minute by minute, hour by hour basis across our entire society is incredible and unprecedented. What's really felt good for me in terms of experiencing this is the level of engagement by people in the private sector. It has absolutely blown me away. The number of people who selflessly are just getting involved and trying to help in a broad way, and doing it not just in sort of this vague, hey, I'm here, how can I help? But bringing what they have as their own unique skills, their own unique interests, the parts of the state that they're living in, the places that they're passionate about, and trying to both help at a very specific detail level as well as a higher level across the whole state. I've also seen a real willingness of the public sector to work with the private sector. And I would say this has been something that is new to me. I'm not somebody who historically has done a lot with the public sector other than be available whenever somebody from the state or federal government or city government calls and says, can you help with this? Can you help with that? And the level of collaboration that I'm seeing across Colorado makes me really happy and makes me have immense respect to be a Coloradan and to see what's happening. A tangible example of this, something that has been in the press a little the last day or two, is going to be rolling out next week, is the Energize Colorado Gap Fund. Some of you may have heard about this. This is a fund that's at least $25 million that's going to be raised and deployed rapidly to people who missed out on PPP, weren't eligible for PPP, didn't have the resources to apply for the PPP loans. It's really aimed at filling a gap for the very small businesses across Colorado, 25 employees or less, that need immediate and urgent financial help through a program like PPP, but that weren't able to access it. It's just one of many, many examples of things that are either becoming available or will become available in the next couple of weeks that many people in the private sector are helping rally, but also that the public sector and the state government specifically is helping support. It's really important to recognize that, like entrepreneurship, many mistakes will be made. There's a lot of things being tried, with rapid iteration. You have a hypothesis, you test it, you try something. If it works, you do more of it. If it doesn't work, you adjust and modify and do something else. And the key here is rapid iteration versus grabbing onto and anchoring on the idea that this is the answer and we need to just do this and all will be fine. That philosophy, which is oftentimes very difficult, I think, in large organizations, it's difficult a lot of times in government. I'm watching people really react with that kind of a frame of reference quite continually across the spectrum for all the different things that I'm involved in, both on the economic side of this as well as the health side of this crisis. I encourage everybody that's involved here to have that same approach. Recognize that there are going to be lots of things that are tried that don't really have much effect. There will be plenty of things that are implemented that are then modified because of the learning that comes immediately after what happens when something's implemented. So this rapid iteration, which is very comfortable and normal to most entrepreneurs and many small business people, I think pretty much everybody across the landscape is having to use this and having to start to think about this approach. I would also encourage everybody to take an attitude of trying to come together and support each other, especially in the context of when things don't work or when things feel inequitable, or when somebody feels like they're left out of something. If as a state, as Coloradans, we can start to focus on the idea of Coloradans helping Coloradans in this crisis, I think we'll end up with a bunch of positive reinforcement loops that are really, really powerful. Last comment I'll make sort of generally, and then I'll make a few specific ones, is I've, in the last 5 weeks, tried to always assume good intentions and be really clear when I'm interacting with someone about what's working and what isn't working. I'm sure that, you know, there are situations where good intentions, assuming good intentions, may be naive, may be wrong, but fundamentally, by assuming good intentions, you're operating from a perspective that everybody's working on trying to get something going together versus the other way around. So just try to hold on to that mindset, especially in situations where you're at cross purposes with somebody, or you think somebody's approaching something incorrectly, or you just may have a totally different viewpoint around something. Fundamentally, I think most of the underlying goals that people have good intentions. A couple of specific things in terms of reopening Colorado. I think it's really important to take heed of what was said by Jared recently about the idea of this being a marathon, not a sprint. We are not just magically opening up Colorado in a week or two. What we're doing is we're very gradually going back to certain work contexts and social contexts, loosening some of the constraints on the stay-at-home order. But we're doing it in the context of trying to build the infrastructure over a long period of time to let us get back to a place that is much more like the historical experiences that we had as Coloradans. I think everybody on this call probably is aware. So if what I'm saying is obvious, I hope, or at least I hope it is. The problem is not solved. The disease did not go away. Things are not magically better. What the last 30 days allowed Colorado to do, and allowed many of the states in the US to do, was to dramatically slow the spread of the disease and give our health system a chance to get ahead of what was the crisis. If we're not safe, if we don't continue to respect this disease, if we don't continue to social distance, if we don't continue to operate under real constraints, which are very, very difficult, we'll have a rapid emergence of the disease state again, and we'll be right back in the same position we were, 3-4 weeks ago, where we were at risk of having our whole health system overwhelmed. And if our whole healthcare system is overwhelmed, we're in for an enormous amount of stress and strain that far exceeds what we've dealt with, both from a health perspective and from an economic perspective. So view what we're doing now and what the state is doing now. And when I say we, I'm not referring so much to the state, I'm referring to we as the private citizens of Colorado. What we're doing is we're starting to re-engage with the next view of what normal is going to look like for us, but we don't snap back to it immediately. It's really important that that be both a broad view from the top down, from the state of Colorado, but more importantly, it be a bottom up view from local communities. Local communities have to form their own views about how to operate, and they have to do it in a way that's constructive and in the context of whatever's defined broadly. And this is really hard because it's really tempting to be, whether it's oppositional or whether it's just, hey, we have to worry about this instead. We're all pieces of a combined whole in Colorado at this point across dealing with this disease state. And understanding what happens as we start to open back up and doing it in a responsible way at all levels is going to be super critical to our success. So I know that's general, but I'll leave you with the idea that what's in front of us is challenging, but I'm personally incredibly optimistic based on the interactions I've been having, way more hours than I expected every day across a bunch of different dimensions of the private sector, and the state government. And I've been amazed at the level of responsiveness, care for Coloradans, and alignment of goals, which is to keep people safe, keep people healthy, while at the same time moving as quickly as we can to get back to a place where we can reopen Colorado and get our economy moving forward again. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going to go, but against the backdrop of knowing that there's immense stress and challenge in the moment.
Great, Brad. We really appreciate your time today. Folks, if you have any questions for Brad, he is going to go ahead and drop off the call. But if you have any questions, submit them in the Q&A function there at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will make sure that we address those for you. Brad, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure.
Great. Next up, I'm going to welcome Mark Betts to the call with ASAP Payroll. Mark, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk today about the next round of the CARES Act funding, in particular the PPP portion and the application process. I'm also going to touch base on the loan forgiveness portion, and then try to spend some time on some unemployment issues related to PEUC and some of the other expansion of unemployment that occurred from the CARES Act. If we can go to the next slide, please. I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through as much of this content as possible. So today, as was mentioned earlier in the call, the second funding bucket of the PPP was signed into law. It was an additional $310 billion, and also was a $60 billion set aside for the EIDL emergency loan programs. Excuse me. Some of the PPP money is being set aside to community financial institutions and smaller banks and credit unions. That should help the parts of Colorado that may not have. Can you hear me okay? Is everyone hearing?
Yep, we can hear you, Mark.
Here. Can you? Okay, great. Some of the expansion provided some additional funding for these credit unions and smaller banks. That should help some areas of the country that had trouble getting funding the first time, hopefully. There's some other items that will be coming out. We'll be analyzing that over the next 24, 48 hours and addressing that going forward. So stay tuned for that. But let's move to the tips portion. There's a lot of confusion over the last round and a lot of issues that people experienced. And we tried to help as many as we could. And over the last week, we kind of learned more about the process of what the lenders were experiencing. No matter if the lenders had an online portal application process or they had a paper process with the loan officers directly, apparently the E-Tran system that each lender had to input this data into was kind of the funnel and the stumbling block for a lot of this interaction. So as we move forward, please work with your lenders as closely to ensure the application is complete, first of all. But I'd also talk to them about the different status and points that they'll experience throughout the process. Just because the bank says, this looks good, I got your application, it's complete, they have to turn around and work in this E-Tran system to re-data entry this information back into the SBA's portal, eTran. And the eTran portal has some limitations and it has some quirkiness that I think was causing some issues with some of the lenders. Most of them got through them, but let's talk about some of those items in here. So the ownership details is very important in terms of the process. On the loan application on the first round, there's some sections in there where it has fields for, I think, 2 or 3 owners listed. It gets a little complicated when you're talking about, you know, people that have minority partners and things like that involved, because you still have to get those people reported as owners. And that was one of the areas that was causing some slowness in terms of the application process, because they would have information missing from one of the owners, perhaps. Another area of concern that shocked me, in fact, was being that I'm in Telluride and a lot of our clients are in these small towns, is these zip codes. So apparently the eTran system, from what I understand, has a requirement to input a 9-digit zip code. So 81435 plus your PO box number, for instance, or different 9-digit zip codes for other areas. They also want to see the physical mailing address of the physical and mailing address is accurate for the business. And they, from what I understand, there's a data verification process in that eTran system that's comparing that physical address against some presumed postal office or other database systems. So as we know from Amazon and other shippers, that can get complicated. Also, your NAICS code needs to be accurate and presumably matching your last tax return for the entity. So that's something to be aware of as well. Most of those things are minor points, but just trying to give you tips for what could be slowing down the application or the lending officers as they're inputting that data into eTran. You want to verify, especially if you're moving to a new bank and your bank was locked out, you want to verify the Secretary of State that the entity's article of incorporation and that the entity is in good standing currently. That's one tip for now to keep in mind. So anyway, the most important thing is reaching out today with your lenders to see if they're coming out with a new application process, if they're going to require you start all over, or what they have there available for you. Some banks are accepting new customers if they establish a new account. I'm hearing, as you can hear in the national news, more effectiveness with community-sized banks. I don't want to call out any in particular, but a lot of banks in the area are really pushing to get this for their clients. So everyone's working hard on this, and as Brad said, you know, we're all trying our best. If you can move forward to the next slide, please. If you can move, yeah, perfect. So really quickly on loan forgiveness, we'll have more you can look on our help site for more information as well, and maybe next week we'll talk more in the future. But loan forgiveness, there's a lot of information and stipulations to be concerned about. We're still waiting, quite frankly, for U.S. Treasury to come out with some guidance to help the lenders, the borrowers, and their accountants understand some of these reductions, for instance, that are listed here in terms of employee levels and full-time. How are they looking at full-time employee counts? Are they doing it based on the Affordable Care Act logic, or is there a different logic that the SBA is looking for? The compensation levels are also something people were asking a lot of questions about, and I unfortunately don't have a lot of information that's very clear to give. So people are going to want to pay attention for guidance as that comes out. And most important, your lender is the person that's going to make the call on forgiveness. So each lending institution's going to have a bunch of people looking into what they want to see to make sure that they're not on the hook for some poor guidance. So work with your lenders because the guidance from one bank to another may differ in terms of reporting requirements, papering the files. It's an 8-week period that begins after the loans are received. At this point in time, we're assuming that's based on a cash basis of accounting, meaning when the payments or those expenses were paid or issued. So check dates would be what you would look at, but keep up to date with your lenders in case they are looking for accrued periods of time. Accounting-wise, we're also advising people when they receive the funds to set up a separate bank account, and this is coming from the National AICPA guidance. But basically, you just want to keep things as clean as possible to make sure you can track receipts and reports for every dollar that was spent so that you have a nice clean packet to turn over to your lender to make forgiveness as easy as possible for them. So no questionable items in there. Whatever is not forgiven will be converted to a traditional loan. And some important tips on accounting: the loan forgiveness will not be treated as taxable income, which is a huge benefit, but the expenses offset by the loan, while they're traditionally deductible for the entity, like payroll would be, you can't be double counted, essentially. So nothing to be too concerned about in the 8-week period, but down the road, work with your tax preparer for your 2020 return to make sure you're not double counting those down the road. If you can move forward, we're going to touch base on unemployment here in the last couple slides. So as part of the CARES Act, there was three main programs that were expanded from the federal level, which the states will be implementing. Colorado and all states had to reprogram essentially all of their softwares to allow for these new programs. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, the PUA, is a brand new program that allows self-employed individuals, 1099 people, to apply for unemployment assistance. This is brand new. Usually those people wouldn't be eligible for unemployment. So this is where a lot of issues are popping up for a lot of people as they're applying for that PUA assistance right now. I've been following a lot of journalists that are following the Colorado Department of Labor and trying to help people. Right now, I mean, frankly, I think the Colorado Public Radio, there's a reporter there named Andy Kinney, I think is his name. If you want to go online, I think he's doing the best reporting on the system issues, which we'll touch upon on the next slide. Also, the federal pandemic unemployment compensation. This is the $600 additional amount that will be retroactive to the claimant's time period, and that's my 10 minutes. And then we have pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, which is an expansion, another 13 weeks of unemployment for those that were already on unemployment and may exhaust it. We can move one more slide. And just to really wrap up here, the qualifications for the PUA is what I'm learning is that if a 1099 self-employed individual also happened to be a W-2 employee at some point from January 2019 forward, you may run into situations where you have to apply and get denied first as a W-2 employee before you can have your 1099 self-employed PUA application accepted. So real hurdles still for these self-employeds to get the PUA acceptance. There's also some glitches in the system that are being reported, and Colorado Department of Labor says to complete the application best to their ability. But you may need to jump on a phone to resolve those issues. So be prepared for long waits, unfortunately. I know my sister-in-law had one this week that helped her, and then she could only resolve that issue if she was on the phone. Going forward, rehired part-time work issues are going to pop up, especially as workers are making offers of employment under this PPP money to get these people back to work. Workers need to be really aware of the work week earnings in order to prevent improper unemployment benefits issues down the road. Employers will face some hurdles as well as they're trying to work with people who are refusing to come back to work. It's going to put everyone in a really awkward situation, but understanding when unemployment and when that offer of work and how that works in terms of this work week and as you're reporting your unemployment claims every week is going to be important. All right.
Great, thanks, Mark. We have a couple questions coming in here. I was going to address Bonnie's question first. She said, what's the name of the fund that Brad talked about? And it's called the Energize Colorado Gap Fund. And where do folks apply? It's not available yet, Bonnie, but we will make sure that we disperse that information properly so that folks know about it when it is available. We have another question here from Todd, and Mark, maybe you can address a bit of this. He says, I've read conflicting information about how an employer can calculate the number of employees. Should that number be pulled from a 941 form or average of a year's 941 forms? Or can an employer use an FTE calculation based on full-time equivalent employees?
In terms of forgiveness, well, there's a question on the application itself on a loan basis. I think it's like when you're making the application for the loan itself, there's a question of number of employees. I think that's informational, but I would ask your lender about how they expect that number of employees to be entered on the application itself. Now, if his question's regarding forgiveness, that is where we're hung up and waiting U.S. Treasury guidance. The Treasury Department has not given the lenders much to go on, unfortunately, at this point, and the accountants as well. And we're all looking for the U.S. Treasury to clarify exactly some of those points. We have some best guesses that we can look at and assume that it's going to be based on something similar to the Affordable Care Act calculations. And under ACA, any employee that's 30 or more hours a week is considered full-time. Anybody less than that, you add up the hours and then you divide that out to figure a full-time equivalent employee, and then you add those two numbers together. It's a great, fun calculation that no one wants to do. So hopefully Treasury comes out with something that can make it so we can start spending some time on programming with software to make it easier for the employers and the lenders to look at those numbers. So I don't have that answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, great. A question from Matt Blackman here. He says, I'm 100% sole owner of my partnership LLC of a business forced to shut down. Myself as business manager and my other employees have only been on payroll since January 1st, 2020. Am I eligible for PUA or unemployment?
I wish I knew that answer. I apologize. I'm not an expert on unemployment insurance and qualifications of it, and especially with these new PUA things. I would assume under that scenario, you could be eligible for a PPP loan, first of all. PPP loans, in that case, you would for new employers, look at certain items from January and February. So you may reach out to a lender pretty quickly on that front. In terms of unemployment for PUA, traditionally unemployment works based on a look-back period of earnings that would be prior to the first quarter of 2020. So my gut feeling would say no, but I can't speak definitively. All this unemployment claim stuff's changed so quickly, and I'm still catching up on that and spending time on PPP. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Thanks, Mark. So we have a question here from Paul. He says, any tips for 1099 self-employed or sole props? If you want to address that question, Mark, I just want to say that the call at 2 o'clock with Southeast region is discussing supporting sole proprietors and 1099 contractors. So if you have questions regarding that, I would suggest jumping on that call. I will also, in our MailChimp email, will drop the recording link to that call if you would like to brush up or learn more about that. But Mark, do you have any advice there or tips?
For PPP or for unemployment? If it's for PPP, applications for them, I would reach out. Those are going to be the most difficult for lenders. I'm hearing they're basing it on Schedule C's and from 2019, which those tax returns a lot of times aren't even completed yet. But reach out to your lending institution as fast as possible on those. Those are going to be more complicated than the traditional payroll-based PPP applications.
Yeah, correct. Let's see, just searching through these here. Ethan and Matt and Ethan, you both have questions in regards to PUA, and I'd be happy to reach out to you to connect you with our unemployment specialist to better answer these questions. But Ethan's asking, I just wanted to say that I ran into a problem with PUA and having a small W-2 wage that disqualified me from PUA. I did call unemployment and was able to get through, but they were no help even though I was talking to a supervisor. This situation is very frustrating. Who can I reach out to?
I'm not sure I can help with the who, but I'm looking at my phone because I took some shots. That is being, if you have more than $2,560 in W-2 wages for 2019, you could run into that issue. If that's probably what he's experiencing.
Correct. And then we have another question.
I mean, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I mean, if you got a supervisor that didn't give you an answer, I'd try again. I mean, I hate to say that, but.
And another follow-up question from Ethan. Can I take PPP when I'm the only employee, and can it be taken in conjunction to employment or with employment?
PPP is related to employment 100%. I'm not exactly sure the nature of that second half, but if you are an S Corp and you're the only employee, then you get, if you get W-2 income, then PPP is a program for you. PPP is also a program if you are don't get on a W-2 and or self-employed. It's just a different application process and calculation.
Right. And Melissa has a question. She says, we own a small gym. Her husband and her own a small gym with no employees, and we're getting paid through guaranteed payments. What are our options? And I'm assuming maybe you're talking in regards to PPP, Melissa, but if you want to address that.
That's similar to what we're calling self-employed, so or 1099s essentially. If you're a gym and you're not a W-2, you're not paid as a W-2, but you're a partnership that has an LLC partnership or single member LLC, everything's on that Schedule C. So work with your accountant and get your Schedule C from 2018 or 2019 and get to your lender, and your application will be based on that Schedule C from what I understand.
Great. I think we've, let's see, let me just run back through here just a second. I think we've addressed all of the questions in Q&A. So Mark, thank you so much for your time. I am gonna go ahead and shut down Q&A at this point and get us moving along here. So just a couple points here, guys, as we wrap up. I first wanna thank everyone at ASAP, at Energize Colorado, and especially our banks who are working diligently to make sure that people are getting access to PPP. We have heard from a few banks in our network that they are running 24-hour, 7 days a week operation and staffing people back to back over the evening hours to make sure that they are getting all of these applications processed. I think that goes unnoted for all these people that are doing so much work to help our small businesses. If there was a question that was not addressed here today, please, you can drop it in the Q&A while we're online right now, and we will follow up. You can also respond back to the MailChimp that I send out every week. If you have a question, that will be routed to SUCO, or excuse me, Startup Colorado's team, and we will route that to the appropriate person to answer your question. I just wanted to mention, so some people may not be aware that we have 4 regional calls. This is not the only regional call that we do. And those regional calls happen every Friday. Ours at 12 o'clock. We have Northwest at 1 p.m., Southeast at 2 p.m., and Northeast at 3 p.m. And I just wanted to share with you what they are talking about today, because the topic does differ region to region every week. So Northwest is talking about regional partnerships to reopen. That call is at 1 p.m. Southeast is talking about supporting sole proprietors and 1099 contractors at 2 p.m. And then Northeast is discussing hemp at 3 p.m. If you're, and I understand people don't have the time to sit on 4 hours of Zoom calls, but we will be dropping again the recordings in that MailChimp email so that you can access all of that information. I also would, if you have any questions about Energize Colorado, I would urge you to visit energizecolorado.com to just keep up to date on what is going on that front. And I would also encourage you to visit Startup Colorado, excuse me, for more information on our regional calls. You can also visit Southwest Colorado Business Recovery Group as well, as we're keeping you up to date on the most immediate news about the CARES Act and other relevant business resources. With that being said, we appreciate everyone's time today on the call and appreciate you joining us. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions whatsoever, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everyone.